I think it's just vapor.
Vaping is safer than smoking, isn't it?
One vape pod has as much nicotine as one pack of cigarettes. Get your head out of the cloud. Talk to your kid about vaping. Visit talkaboutvaping.org. Brought to you by the American Lung Association and the Ad Council.
This is your tech news briefing for Monday, July 19th. I'm Zoe Thomas for the Wall Street Journal. Technology that can read your thoughts may be one step closer to reality. Scientists in California say they've successfully tested an implant that translated brain signals into words on a computer screen. They say the technology gave back the power of speech to a man who'd lost it. On today's episode, our tech reporter Rolf Winkler joins us to take a look at how this particular experiment worked and how it fits in with other efforts to advance this type of technology. That's after these headlines. On Friday, China sent regulators, including state security and police officials, to the headquarters of ride-hailing company Didi. The officials will be based there during China's investigation of Didi's cybersecurity, which began last month, days after the company went public in New York. The investigation involves representatives from several government agencies, including those that oversee the country's internet, domestic security, and counter-espionage efforts. Didi didn't respond to a request for comment. Electric truck company Lordstown Motors confirmed in a regulatory filing that it's under investigation by the Justice Department. Authorities are looking into the company's reverse merger, which allowed it to go public last year. The DOJ is also looking into claims the company made about pre-orders for its forthcoming pickup truck, the Endurance, which is set to go into limited production in September. The Wall Street Journal first reported the investigation earlier this month. And Twitter users now have the option of seeing automated captions for voice tweets. The voice tweets feature was introduced in June 2020, but without automated captions. That prompted criticism from accessibility advocates who said the feature excludes people who are deaf or hard of hearing. The captions cannot be edited by users. Twitter's head of accessibility said the company knows the system won't be perfect, but said it's one of many steps the company is taking to increase accessibility. All right, coming up, how a brain implant turned thoughts into words for a man who hadn't spoken in over a decade. What does it mean for the future of neuroscience technology? We'll take a look after the break.
I'm Alex Ewell, host of the Readback from Barron's. It's been an extraordinary year for stock markets, particularly for companies going public. IPOs soared, and they show no sign of slowing down. But the boom didn't come out of the blue, and there was plenty of pain on the road to IPO success. So how do you put a price on innovation? This season on The Readback, we'll find out. We're winding back the clock on a decade of IPOs, from Moderna and Facebook to Uber and Airbnb. The Readback is available wherever you get podcasts.
The idea of connecting our brains to a computer to communicate is hardly new. But so-called brain-computer interfaces took a step forward last week when researchers in California said they developed and successfully tested an experimental implant that can translate brain signals into words on a computer screen. Joining us now to discuss how this experiment worked and what it means for the emerging sector is our technology reporter, Rolf Winkler. Hi, Rolf. Thanks for joining us.
Hi, Zoe. How are you?
I'm doing great. Tell me, how does this brain-computer interface technology work?
Brain-computer interfaces are computers that read the electrical signals inside your brain in order to, in effect, make something physical in the world happen based on brainwaves alone. So, for instance, a lot of the work that's being done is meant to help people move a cursor, a computer cursor, or type, or in this case, learn to speak just from their brainwaves.
Can you take us through this particular experiment? Let's start with, what do we know about the person who volunteered for the experiment?
The person who volunteered for it was a man who was in an accident over a decade ago, suffered a stroke in his brainstem, and is effectively quadriplegic. Can't move any of his limbs, can't speak, but he's perfectly lucid. And what they did was they attached a computer array about half the size of a credit card inside his skull on top of his brain, so that it could listen in to signals happening underneath the brain. Imagine a helicopter that was flying over a football stadium and had a microphone attached to it. And you could listen to the noise inside the stadium and maybe average some data out of the noise and get a sense for what's actually happening inside the stadium. The difference between that method and other brain-computer interface technology, other people put electrodes that measure the brain activity directly inside the brain. So imagine that helicopter flying over the stadium now has its microphone attached to a rope that it can drop down all the way to the field, right? So it can listen to an individual person speaking.
So we know the researchers implanted a chip on top of this man's brain. How did they actually go about testing that it worked?
One computer would prompt the man to say a word. A separate computer, the one plugged into his brain, would then read what he was trying to say. That second computer didn't know what the first computer said, right? So having trained the second computer to recognize those brainwaves and to figure out what words those are, it would try to output whatever the man was saying. It was basically matching.
So how did the experiment work out? What did the researchers find?
What's interesting about this research is a couple things. First off, this is a person who hasn't been able to speak for 15 years. He does communicate today with basically a pointer attached to a baseball cap that he then pecks out individual letters on a computer screen. It's just laborious. You would assume potentially that the sections of his brain responsible for speech still work. Well, this research proves it. Another thing that it demonstrates was this research team was able to train a computer to learn full words, not just letters, which, again, holds out promise for future technology as they're able to build on this for vastly improving the speed at which people who can't speak would be able to communicate. If they don't have to go letter by letter, if they can go word for word, they could theoretically speak much more quickly. So that's also hopeful.
But how much vocabulary does somebody using this technology gain versus, say, how many words you and I use when we're talking?
Well, that's a key point, Zoe. There were some significant limitations here. One is the vocabulary that he was able to use. It was only 50 words. If they had picked more words, the error rates would have probably spiked. And if they'd picked fewer words, even fewer than 50, then it's potentially meaningless because 50 words is a microscopic vocabulary. They also, even with that limited vocabulary, spent a lot of time teaching this computer. They collected 22 hours of brain data over 50 sessions over 81 weeks with the man in order to achieve its results. And the words it was able to pick out were correct about 50% of the time. And then they were able to add technology on top of it, an auto-suggest feature, kind of like what we have on our Google Docs or on your iPhone. And that boosted the accuracy rate to 76%. But the error rate was high, right? So limited vocabulary, high error rate, a long time to train the computer, all demonstrate that this is a slow process.
Okay, so those were the outcomes for researchers. Do we know what it was like for the man at the center of this experiment?
The researchers talk about how he was very excited that when the computer would get words correct, they described him as giggling ever so slightly to the extent he was able. And even they used the word shake, that he would almost vibrate with joy.
That's wonderful. I just want to step back for a bit. It sounds like this is still pretty early days for this technology, but when it does improve, how do researchers expect this to be used? Who is this technology intended for?
For men and women just like this, people who have lost their ability to speak. That is, these are the first people that this science wants to help, are the thousands of people who, through stroke or with accidents or for other reasons lose their power of speech every year. So they really want to help those folks. Now, there are the companies who are interested in the technologies.
Yeah, so tell me a bit about that. This research, for instance, was done by a team at the University of California, San Francisco, but one of the sponsors for the project was Facebook. Why would Facebook want to be involved in this type of research?
Well, Facebook has a big virtual reality, augmented reality group. They've been sponsoring this group out of UCSF, and Facebook has said what they wanted was, in effect, a non-invasive wearable What if they could put a helmet on you that with optical signals could somehow read into you, through your skull, into your brain, so that it could, again, allow you to control things with your mind, but wouldn't require you to get brain surgery. However, one interesting thing that came with this announcement was that Facebook said they're pulling their funding. They're no longer going to fund this research group, which they've been supporting for a few years, in part because that goal of a helmet that's going to read your brain is so remote that what they've decided to do is shift gears.
But it's not the only private company in this space. There are other similar technologies being developed, right?
Yeah, Elon Musk has a startup called Neuralink, which has done similar work, even more advanced work in monkeys. There are others. Brian Johnson has a startup called Kernel. These companies all are working toward a day when you'd be able to think and type on your phone by thinking, as opposed to having to bang out letters with your thumbs. Neuralink has put these electrodes in a monkey who can play the game Pong with his brain, right? So that is the other element of this research that is interesting, is how there are companies that want to bring it to healthy people who could theoretically get elective brain surgery, or maybe there will be non-invasive devices.
All right, so a lot of corporate interest, and now we have this promising experiment. What are people who watch this space telling you about what they hope for this technology?
They're saying, science moves slowly. This is a nice incremental advance, and it holds out hope for a device that would allow people like this man to speak in full words at some point in the future. But they're often cautious, as scientists are, and say, we've got a long way to go.
All right, well, we'll have to leave it there. That's our reporter, Rolf Winkler. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Zoe.
And that's all for today's Tech News Briefing. You can always find more tech stories on our website, WSJ.com. And if you like our show, please rate and review us. You can do that wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Zoe Thomas for the Wall Street Journal. Thanks for listening.